bachelor's degree focused in communication and media studies, sales and marketing from the University of Notre Dame, Sydney, New South Wales. Completed studies in philosophy and theology, including church history and Christology. Fred has a history of working in the oil and energy industry, skilled in business planning, customer service, strategic planning, business development, and sales management. Fred is currently responsible for the leadership, strategic direction, planning, and management of sales and businesses with arcenergy. A true leader, Fred is backed by a wealth of experience across business planning, marketing, and strategy management, with a track record of driving growth and innovation and adding an increased sales value to the client's projects. His organization has grown to manage a large sector of the energy market through his embedded network solutions. The company provides power, gas, and infrastructure throughout New South Wales, Queensland, and Victoria. For each project managed by arcenergy, Fred and his team of experts ensures optimum result, working closely with developers, consultants, and end users to ensure that all parties' expectations are exceeded. As one of the founding directors of the company, Fred has been instrumental in building one of Australia's leading embodied network companies. It is my pleasure and honor to host Fred today to give us an insight about his own start in business, his earlier years, and of course about his successful business. Welcome, Fred.
Thank you, Sarkis.
It's really great to see you with us in the studio today, and I'm sure with your busy schedule, I really appreciate your presence here, but I'm sure my listeners are looking forward to hear from you, your story from the beginning to now.
Pleased to be here.
Thank you, Fred. What can you tell us about your younger years, your studies?
Oh, wow.
Yeah. It's not that long ago.
No. Okay. Like most Lebanese in Australia, born of migrants, parents that migrated in the early 70s, just prior to the Civil War. So all the right attributes, I guess, that you get from a Lebanese family, that you have your faith. That's a fundamental. Parents having to work long hours, of course, to try and make get the opportunity to buy their home, and have their kids, and provide for even family overseas. So, your normal upbringing, I don't think anything unusual from, any of my other community members. But my parents established businesses, and I think like most Lebanese, the idea is to come here to this country and not actually be an employee, but save enough money to establish your own business. So I got to see my parents do that firsthand through a number of businesses, including milk bars, fruit markets, takeaways, and so I was pretty much brought up
in the business atmosphere.
And faced at a young age, the consumer. So I think customer service was inbred, part of our DNA now. I got to see my parents go through, those tough times, and they were fun times, but they were definitely tough. And I believe a lot of what I have today is because I see them go through that hard work, and so I value what hard work means, and that's obviously contributed to my business success, of course.
Of course. The Lebanese family is known for its closeness. How much did your parents and that discipline or that family ethics help to shape your personality?
I remember as a kid having family around us all the time. I don't think there was a weekend that went by that we didn't celebrate a barbecue, and amongst my cousins, and we're still very close to this day. But I think it plays a very big part, community and family. And I think with the Lebanese in particular, not knowing the native tongue, having to learn and adapt to a new culture, a new environment, all they had was family and community, and that's what kept us tight. And actually, I talk about this with my wife. It's something that's lacking today. We still have definitely elements to it, but not as much as what we did.
Why, in your opinion, this is lacking now and things have changed?
I think our priorities have changed. I think our focus isn't family. We have too many conveniences. So, whereas in the past, if mum needed to leave me and my brothers and sister with an auntie, that was quite easily done. And because we were so in the same perimeter, it was only a stroll. Now we've kind of, I guess, taken the lifestyle that we live today for granted. So we have childcare centres. We kind of leave it. We leave our kids to the system, and I think that's kind of changed the way they think today. We've got social media. We've got technology, and I think that's played a significant role in changing and developing the way we think.
Fred, you mentioned faith and had an impact on you as you were growing up. How much faith mean to you now after all those years of business and success?
Fair to say that as a kid, I remember my parish is St. Joseph's in Croydon. Even though I attended St. Charles in year 1 and year 2, before we had to relocate to Victoria, because Dad had a bit of work down there. We had a few.
What year we're talking about?
We're going early 80s, mid 80s,
Yep.
And we made our way back up to Sydney around the 88. But we lived in a town in Laverton, Victoria, Altona, a very bogan town. So we're pretty much really only a handful of Lebanese, or what they called us back in those days as wogs, politically incorrect. So much so, my father's name, Glenn, because he was in the area we lived in particular, he was the only, our family was the only Lebanese. The local Australians would call my father Sid, and that stood for the wog from Sydney. So even until today, his name stuck. So we call our father, his friends, my my uncles and their sons and all that. We all call my father Sid.
Fred, now that you said the word wog,
Yeah.
of course, how much did this sort of inspired you or gave you a challenge to prove that you are an Aussie,
Yeah.
that you want to contribute to this great country?
Yeah.
How much did that?
I think being brought up in Melbourne for a little while, in Sydney, and back in the schooling days, we did have less of students that were of Lebanese or immigrant, parents. We had a lot more Australians around us, and I think some of us did actually have a complex. Yeah, we thought we were the outsiders, so we had to work much harder to prove ourselves. And I don't think that was a disadvantage. I think that's what makes us. A lot of the Lebanese today are very successful. I think anywhere not just in Australia, but in the world, that Lebanese have achieved and made great accomplishments. So, my parents were my mentors as a kid. So I saw the hard work. I saw the racism, how they weren't considered, purely on their work ethic. They were considered more colour of the skin, the language barrier. So I wanted to make sure that I overcame that. I had an elder brother who led by example, John, and I got
John is the mayor of
he is.
Yeah,
I think he's been residing for about 14.
Yeah.
And we wanted to be a good example to our younger brothers. So and they're all well established now. So we had good surroundings. We had a good, strong, tight-knit community, and that factored in to our success, I believe, because we had that support, and that we could lean on, a community that assisted and supported us by giving, giving my parents the ability to leave us with them while they worked. But eventually, when we got old enough, our parents kind of put us into the businesses and kept us there. So we became very responsible at a very young age. Yeah, there was no time to rest, even during schooling. After hours, we would go straight from school, try and get a bit of homework in, and then straight into the businesses to help my parents run them once they established them. And that went on for many, 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 many years. And only up until 2-3 years ago, my parents pretty much sold the businesses, and one of my siblings took over, right? And so there's a bit of a legacy with what we've owned, but myself and my brothers have gone on to do our own things. John obviously in politics, myself in private sector and energy, and two younger brothers, one in finance, and one as a builder. And the younger sister obviously running a business that she kind of taken over from the family business. So yeah. And faith, absolutely. Faith, we've always depended.
Yeah.
Mum put the fear of God in us. Absolutely.
If it wasn't for faith, really, when we look back, how much our parents or earlier migrants struggled to establish themselves and grow a family. And you're a prime example of this result. These days, or of this struggle, these days, it seems to be easier for the new migrants to come. There's everything available, everything is there. They don't have to struggle as much. Even the language barrier seems to have been removed.
They've overcome it, yeah.
So you comparing those days with today, what do you think?
Yeah, no, definitely. Look, for every generation, there's difficulties, no doubt.
Yeah.
During my parents' time and in our community back in the 80s, 70s, Australia was a different place. We weren't a politically correct society, so anything pretty much went. And so I think the migrants today, I still think they have their difficulties, but you can't, no doubt, Lebanese culture, any generation, a very hard work ethic. I know many migrants that have come over only recently, we're talking over the last 10 years, and they've become very successful. And I think it's pretty much that they're willing to roll their sleeves up and do the hard work, put in the long hours, and you can't take that away. That's a very strong attribute that we have as Lebanese.
Fred, you completed studies in philosophy and theology, including church history and Christology. What prompted you? What inspired you to do this?
Once again, parents instilled the faith at a young age. No matter how hard it got for them, Sarkis, they always attended church. And because we're a tight-knit community, we got to celebrate Christianity in its truest sense, in its orthodoxy. I'm talking about christenings without all the bells and whistles, weddings, true celebration for what it signified. And yeah, we've been encompassed by society today, and it is about the fancy cars and the outfits, and who can put on a big show, and talk about it for the next year or so. But back then, you celebrated it for the right reason.
How much did this add to your knowledge already from parents?
Serving as altar boys, going to church with my grandma every day. Remembering what it meant. The incense, how important and how the Eucharist was. Those things back then meant so much more. Today, there's, I guess, just a lot of noise. It's just a lot of noise. It's the emphasis isn't on the faith anymore. It tends to be on the religion. Identifying as a Catholic or an Orthodox, or any faith for that. But it meant a lot to us. My mother and father instilled the right values. They made sure that we were brought up in the right moral standings, and that we weren't spoken of. We didn't do the wrong thing. That God was always looking at us. That even if they couldn't see what was going on, God would. So that always had us in two minds.
Yeah.
Before we made a decision. And I guess, like a teenager, you kind of move away from the faith. You go through a bit of a discovery.
There's a lot of distractions.
Yeah, but I believe the foundation was there, and eventually I had a few experiences, and like I said, having good community, that they kept you close. And I had at some point, I guess, an awakening or a zeal to further my studies and understand a bit more about the faith. So that compelled me to go and study theology and Christology and church history. And I remember reading something as well, that up until the 1950s, our politicians, our teachers, our doctors had to get a philosophy degree, or had to learn philosophy. Maybe not, complete a degree in philosophy, but they had to learn the subject of philosophy. And I think that's what's lacking in today's day and age. The fact that we don't tie ourselves to the past as much. Things are forgotten quite easily. And so that kind of motivated me to get into the studies. Yeah,
it's incredible that with all your achievements and all you being busy most of the time, that you still studied and you still kept that faith going.
Yeah, absolutely.
This is just amazing. Now, if you move to your business, Fred, is it what you always wanted to do, this kind of business, or you've thought of probably becoming a lawyer or a doctor or any other profession?
Yeah, no, I don't think I was ever cut out to be a doctor or a lawyer. Academically, as a child, I did struggle a little. I had some of the conditions that we're diagnosed with today, like the ADD, OCD, and so on. I just learned to harness it. Obviously, my parents struggled to kind of cater to my needs, but luckily I had a loving auntie who helped me focus in, on my studies, and kind of adapt my learning methods. And today, it's no longer a diagnosis of it's a learning difficulty, but more it's they're either a creative child, or they learn, or they see things differently. Most definitely for myself. So my first business was actually in telecommunications. So the energy business I'm in right now, I kind of fell into. via affiliation and a few networks and relationships.
You're talking about the arcenergy now.
arcenergy. Yeah. I made those along the way. But I actually started off in telecommunications. We ran a very successful telecommunication company back in 2004 up until 2008. During the GFC, we had to sell the business. We got into a bit of a bidding war between Optus and Telstra, and so we just couldn't sustain our market rate. So we sold off to a competitor, and then I kind of I stayed in telco. I moved into a publicly listed company as a GM, a company called People Telecom, well known in the early and up until 2010. They got bought out by M2. So I worked there as a GM running, coordinating 300 staff. Working with an organisation like that, before I actually got into energy through my relationships, as I said. So I got to meet some people in the industry, and I came across this business model that included installing meters for developers, organising submissions for gas, and taking my telecommunications experience. We've actually incorporated in our energy business the ability to integrate an alternative fibre or an NBN alternative, so that we can streamline the process and project manage for the developer a better outcome. And ultimately, I could see that a lot of developers struggled with having to liaise with your utility providers and your essential services, like your gas networks, and your metering infrastructure and your energy retailers. So I saw a niche in the market there, and it was pretty much about filling the gap. And that's what we've been able to accomplish. And it's worked fantastically for us. We've built some great relationships. We've got some fantastic clients, and we've taken our market, we've helped it evolve to what it is today.
How difficult was it, Fred, to start? Especially, I'm sure the industry giants, they weren't very helpful at the start. I mean, of course, your leadership skills, your determination, all that, of course, would have helped. But how difficult was it to establish yourself?
Yeah, I think with any startup business, you always encompass a challenge of trying to get through your first year. Obviously, cash flow,